My name is Topher Brennan, and I'm running for U.S. Senate. Just under 4 months ago, my spouse, Ozzy, and I were here at SFO for another reason. We were here at the International Terminal to protest Donald Trump's Muslim ban. It was a scary time. I know I had coworkers who were, because of the ban, now having to have second thoughts about visiting families in their home countries. Even if they weren't from one of the countries targeted by the ban, Donald Trump had only been in office for a week and a half at that point. So if he was doing something so extreme after a week and a half, who knows, people were thinking, who knows what he would do the next day. But it was also an exciting experience. It was really inspiring and energizing to see people coming together from all around the Bay Area to say, this is not who we are as a nation. There were all kinds of signs with different messages of solidarity from different people of all types, all, races, genders, religions, and so on. My spouse, Ozzy, made a sign that said "Queer Atheist for Muslims," made it on the spot, borrowed a piece of poster board and a marker from someone else who was at the protest, someone we'd never met before, stuck it up against a pillar to make the sign. Though Ozzy did misspell the word atheist, which is, I guess, one of the hazards of doing a spur-of-the-moment idea in permanent marker. Now, I'm here today for a similar reason. I'm here because I believe what California needs right now is a senator who will resist Donald Trump's agenda every step of the way. Let me say a little more about the Muslim ban. When I came to protest in January, I came not because I don't take the threat of ISIS seriously. Rather, I came because I know that the people who are in the greatest danger from Islamic fundamentalism are other Muslims and members of other religious groups living in Muslim-majority countries. I believe that if we want to protect people from ISIS, the very first thing we should be doing is welcoming them as refugees. The Muslim ban, in contrast, was giving ISIS what they wanted. They want to be able to portray the West as the enemy of Islam. But we cannot give in to fear. We cannot allow the likes of ISIS to determine how we treat our fellow human beings. Now, thankfully, the Muslim ban was blocked by a series of court decisions, and I think much of the credit for that fact has to go to President Trump himself for doing such a bad job of hiding the fact that the Muslim ban really was targeting Muslims, despite what lawyers representing the White House have since claimed. I really feel bad for the career Department of Justice attorneys who've had to defend that executive order in court. If you see some of the footage, they know that it's totally and completely illegal. So I feel bad for them. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. But I also think part of what led to the defeat of the Muslim ban in court is not just that it was unconstitutional and that Trump had done such a bad job of hiding his intentions. I do believe that the protests that happened here at SFO and at other places around the nation helped. Even when the government does something that is as blatantly illegal and unconstitutional as targeting people to keep out of the country based on coming from a Muslim-majority country, I think some judges will be hesitant to rule against the government if they think they're going to be hounded for supposedly overriding the will of the American people. And what we did in January as a nation is we showed the world that, in fact, what Trump was doing did not reflect the will of the American people. It is not who we are as a nation. And in fact, I believe that Trump's entire agenda on immigration goes against America's best ideals. We are a nation of immigrants, and yet Donald Trump insists on scapegoating immigrants, blaming them for crime, even when crime rates in America are at multi-decade lows. Recently, he also signed another executive order that was supposed to withhold federal funding from so-called sanctuary cities, places like San Francisco and Los Angeles and Berkeley, and possibly in the future, California State as a whole. And Trump wanted to withhold federal funds from them because they have policies in place that say local police are not going to get involved in enforcing immigration laws because that's not their job. And this executive order has also been blocked by the courts for the very simple reason that the president is not a dictator. He can't go around giving orders to local police, and he can't try to enforce those orders using money that Congress has budgeted for some other purpose unrelated to immigration enforcement. And the rationale for the executive order made no sense whatsoever. It's, the cities that were being targeted are in many cases just places where the police are saying we are not going to get involved with things that are not part of our job, which is keeping people of our local communities safe. And having to act as an arm of immigrations and customs enforcement interferes with that goal. Because it forces immigrants to think twice about calling the police. It forces them to wonder if they're really calling the city police or are they calling ICE. And in some cases, the cities being targeted, they've done even less than that. In some cases, all they're doing is doing what they have to do legally and not holding people in jail unless they have a good reason. In a free country like America, you need a better reason to hold people in jail than ICE or any other part of the government says we want this person in jail. You need a better reason than that. And the idea that this is somehow protecting dangerous criminals just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The statistics show that immigrants, documented and undocumented, actually commit crimes at a lower rate than the general population. So this idea that we need to crack down on immigrant crime is just deciding to enact harsher penalties on one group of people for no reason at all. Absolutely no reason at all. It's deeply wrong, but it's also deeply foolish. Now, California Senator Dianne Feinstein has often done good work in this area. A couple years ago, for example, Republicans in Congress tried to force through a bill that was supposed to crack down on sanctuary cities, similar to Trump's executive order. And I'm happy to say that both of California's senators, Senator Feinstein and also Barbara Boxer, who's since retired, took part in blocking that terrible bill. But at the time, Senator Feinstein did something else which I think illustrates the differences in how we think about these issues. She tried to push for a bill that said, okay, we won't force local police to hand people over to ICE, we'll just force them to share certain information with ICE. And I think that was a mistake. You're still singling out one group of people for no good reason, and you're still forcing immigrants to think twice before calling the police and making them trust police less and make it harder for the police to do their jobs. This is not an issue, as much as I understand the issue to compromise and find middle ground, this is not an issue we should be triangulating on. Now, I mentioned that Donald Trump seems to have issues with the fact that he is not a dictator. He cannot, for example, order around local police. And this is not just a problem with his immigration policies. This is something that he's shown us again and again and again, that he has no respect for America's institutions and our norms of governance. On the campaign trail, he praised authoritarian rulers like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un for being strong and tough. He encouraged his followers to beat up peaceful protesters. He talked about suing critics in the press, wanting to make that easier. Once he was elected, he broke promises to release his tax returns and separate himself from his businesses to eliminate conflicts of interest. Just again and again and again, he's done things that, if he were allowed to get away with them, would push America closer to being a banana republic. Most recently, there was the firing of James Comey, director of the FBI, because Trump initially pretended it was for another reason, but within a day apparently got tired of pretending because he's impatient or something, and admitted on TV that he did it because he was unhappy with the investigation that the FBI is doing and is doing right now into contacts between his campaign and the Russian government. Now, this is, first of all, clear obstruction of justice. It's what Nixon was forced to resign for doing. But more than that, and I think it's bad enough, and Trump should absolutely be impeached for it just on grounds of obstruction of justice. But it's worse than that, because the FBI, again, the president is not a dictator. The FBI and the Department of Justice in general need to be independent. Otherwise, you could have a president protecting his political allies, as Trump was trying to do, but not only that, sending the FBI on fishing expeditions trying to dig up dirt on things his political opponents may or may not have done. So this is another area where Congress absolutely needs to show leadership, because Congress is not just responsible for passing laws and passing budgets. It's also supposed to be a watchdog on the executive branch to make sure that the laws it passes and the money it appropriates are enforced and spent in the way they're supposed to be. And Republicans have yet to reach the point. They've done a lot of questionable things to try to ram through their agenda, but they have yet to reach the point of saying we're just going to lock Democrats out of committee meetings and the executive branch is only going to share information with politicians that are on its side. So even though it's hard right now, and Democrats are in the minority of both houses of Congress, our leaders in Congress still have a responsibility to be watchdogs. And I think that matters. Again, as we saw with the protests against the Muslim ban, we have seen that sometimes, not as often as we like, but sometimes, and on some really important occasions, Republicans in Congress and Trump's staff at the White House can be shamed into backing down from their worst ideas. And Congress is in a unique position to do that. And again, Senator Feinstein has done some very good work of this type. For example, she led the Senate Intelligence Committee in its investigation in the use of torture during George W. Bush's administration, which was very, very important work. What happened during the Bush years was absolutely horrifying. But once again, I think sometimes her instincts towards moderation and bipartisanship have led her astray here. Recently, as again, many of you know, Trump campaigned on bringing back torture, bringing back worse than waterboarding, he said. And he appointed people to his cabinet to be CIA director and director of national intelligence who had previously slammed Senator Feinstein's torture report for supposedly endangering national security. And yet Senator Feinstein voted to confirm both of those appointees. Now, I understand the impulse to not be seen holding a grudge, but I don't think torture is an issue where we should be saying, oh, let's let the past be the past. In 2009, we all thought that torture was behind us, that the things George W. Bush did would never happen again. And Trump has forced us, unfortunately, to reevaluate those assumptions. So Congress really needs to step up here and fight and not let a desire for bipartisanship to lull them into complacency on these issues. The things Trump is doing, even though he doesn't always succeed, thankfully, the things he is trying to do are profoundly dangerous, and we need to fight every step of the way, even when it's hard. Now, this does not exhaust the scary things Trump has been doing, or in some cases not doing, because as bad as all these things are, sometimes I'm more frightened by what he hasn't been doing, namely having any kind of competent or coherent foreign policy. This is, on issues like being able to craft executive orders that pass judicial review, Trump's incompetence can be kind of relieving at times. But it's not so amusing on life or death foreign policy issues where we don't have the option of doing nothing. Take the North Korea situation, for example. I've lived in South Korea. I taught English there for a while. And here in the United States, we talk about, well, if North Korea ever manages to build ICBM that is capable of getting across the Pacific, that will be very scary. But living in South Korea, it was different. Life could seem very normal for extended periods of time, but then when there was a crisis, everything could become very terrifying very quickly. Now, probably Kim Jong-un doesn't want a war. Probably the North Korean government realizes that if there ever was a war, they would lose. But if somehow a crisis spiraled out of control, a lot of innocent people could die before the North Korean military was defeated. This is not something where the president can just wing it. And that, unfortunately, is what Trump has been doing. One week, he says, or rather, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, says that negotiation with North Korea is not an option. No longer an option. We are giving up. We are abandoning the Obama administration's policy of being patient with North Korea. But then the next week he says, oh, just kidding, negotiation is an option after all. On the campaign trail, Trump suggested that South Korea should get its own nuclear weapons, and more recently Tillerson has said that a denuclearized North Korea is our, or no, actually no, he didn't say a denuclearized North Korea, he said a denuclearized Korean Peninsula is our only goal, which is also a strange thing to say. The current situation where North Korea has nuclear weapons, and this complicates the situation enormously, and it's going to be very difficult to persuade them to give up their weapons, that's not good. But it's a whole lot better than having a second Korean War where a huge number of people die. And the other thing that was amazing to me about Trump's statements on North Korea is that since becoming president, he also apparently reported that after a 10-minute conversation with China's president, he realized that the situation with North Korea is complicated. Gee, you think? I wish he'd been able to get someone to tell him that before the Chinese president had to. And again, this is an area where Congress needs to show leadership. Now, Congress can't force Trump to have a competent foreign policy, which is one reason why I hope the Comey firing will lead to Trump being removed from office or convinced to resign sooner rather than later, because the way Trump is handling foreign policy right now is very dangerous, and Mike Pence, for all his flaws, I don't think would be so amateurish about it. So that's a hard problem. But there are some things Congress can do. In particular, I think Congress needs to insist more than ever that only it has the right to declare war, that Trump can't one day wake up and decide to get the US involved in a war on his own personal whim. This is something that I've always thought, but it is more important now than ever, and Congress can't pass the buck because they don't want to take responsibility for the decision whether or not to go to war in a particular situation. Now, the last issue I want to talk about is something that is on a lot of people's minds, which is healthcare. And this is something that many people are very worried about the Republican attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Huge numbers of people could lose their insurance company if the Obamacare repeal succeeds. The cuts to Medicaid that Trump is proposing, those are an issue that hit home for me because my spouse Ozzy is disabled, and the Medicaid cuts really threaten the ability of a lot of disabled people to live independently and pursue careers. It's also a problem for seniors who rely on Medicaid to pay for things that Medicare doesn't pay for. So that's why I'm relieved to see Democrats in Congress not giving an inch to the Republican Party on this issue. But it isn't enough to protect the status quo with the Affordable Care Act. We still have millions of people who don't have health insurance, and we need to do something for them. We can't insist that everything is fine. Even though the Affordable Care Act has done good things, it's allowed many people to get insurance who previously couldn't afford it, we can't ignore the people who it isn't serving well. We need a government that acts like everyone matters. And that's why I support Medicare for All. Every other developed nation in the world guarantees universal health care for its citizens. We do it for senior citizens through Medicare. We know this is possible. We just have to do it. And this is why I was really disappointed and honestly surprised when recently Senator Feinstein said, I believe her words were, if single payer means a complete government takeover of the healthcare sector, I don't support that. And I'm used to politicians being reluctant to take a stand, being evasive, but I was genuinely surprised to hear her saying something that was this misinformed, because that's not how Medicare works. Medicare did not require doctors who serve senior citizens to become government employees. It didn't require nationalizing hospitals. And that's also not what the single-payer proposals that have been proposed in Congress do. So I think that was a really unfortunate remark. In general, I think Senator Feinstein's instincts, even though she has done many good things in her nearly 50 years in politics, her instincts are often to err on the side of moderation and compromise and bipartisanship. And often that's a good thing. Our system of government requires compromise in order to function. But I don't think those are the instincts we need right now with Trump as president. What I think California needs is, as I've said before, a senator who is going to fight back against Donald Trump's agenda every step of the way. And I promise that if elected to the Senate, if Trump is for something, I will vote against it. And I will work every day to make sure that he is impeached. Thank you.